Welcome to the Simpleton Podcast, the official podcast of A Simple House. We're here with our very first interview person and very first returning guest, Mike Tenney of Culture Catechism.
Happy to be back. Good to see you, Clark.
So it's been about 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
Some pop culture has happened in the last 6 months.
It has.
So as someone who is largely out of touch, do you want to fill me in on any major events? Did Taylor Swift release an album in the last 6 months?
Oddly enough, no. So we'll mention Taylor because we have to. So the kind of in the music world, the last of the COVID projects are coming out. All the artists made COVID projects. You know, they were recording while they were in quarantine, and some made 2 or 3 albums, and the last of those are coming out. So the big ones are Kendrick Lamar came out with a new album, Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, which is pretty good. It has a couple good songs on that. One called Die Hard, one called N95. Just this past week, Drake dropped a surprise album, which I've listened to a little bit. The big album right now and #1 song in the world, Harry Styles, his new song is called As It Was. People are anticipating the next Taylor Swift release. She's been slowly re-recording all her albums, and the next album she's set to release is 1989. So
everyone you mentioned, like, who's the youngest person you mentioned?
The youngest of those is probably Harry Styles. He's probably like 27 or something like that.
So these are kind of older artists.
Yeah, some of these are older artists, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, so pop culture is super broad, right?
Yep.
Your wheelhouse on your channel. I want to hear more about what you guys have put episodes out on. But you guys are mainly entertainment.
Yeah, we focus about 2/3 on music, 1/3 on like TV shows and movies. But a couple things we've done recently. We did a episode on Stranger Things. That's probably the biggest show on Netflix right now. They just came out with season 4. They released like half the season, and they got the other half coming out. And then what everyone's watching right now is the Obi-Wan Kenobi show on Disney Plus. Which has been really interesting. There's 1 episode left to come out. They've got 5 of 6 that are out right now. And then in the Marvel world, there was Moon Knight was their last series, and now they have Miss Marvel, which I haven't gotten to watch yet, but I've heard is pretty good. So
I feel like I paid attention to comics in the 80s. This is so lame. I feel like I'm the lame guy that you have to tell about pop culture to. But like, I remember Moon Knight. Like, I bought that, you know? Like, I recently saw a piece of spray painted graffiti on a telephone pole that said Alpha Flight, which is like this weird Canadian superhero group from the 80s.
Yeah.
You know? Like, it seems like they're mining deep in the Marvel pantheon.
Very deep. Yeah, they're definitely going deep.
So I've heard some people say that there's like a deadness in pop culture right now. Like, there's nothing interesting on TV. And that doesn't mean you can't find one, right? Yeah. But do you feel like we are at a certain cultural like boring point?
So yeah, yes and no. So a lot of people are saying this is the golden age of TV because there are so many streaming services, and especially because COVID had everybody sitting at home, that there's more TV shows being made than ever before. And there's bigger stars in TV shows. Like, it used to kind of be, you really wanted to be a movie star. That was like the biggest thing you could do. And then like TV was kind of a stepping stone to that. But now you have big name stars like, you know, Chris Pratt and many of those Marvel superheroes are now having their own shows, you know.
And I've heard that story, and I heard that stories also because we're now, because of binge watching and streaming, we can tell way better stories via TV shows than we used to, you know. You don't have to wait a week, you know. So where a sitcom makes a lot more sense when everything's just self-contained and you're just reusing the sets,
and you can watch it whenever. Like, it used to be, if you didn't happen to be home at 7:30 on Wednesday, then you missed that episode. So shows used to be much more episodic, where it was just like, here's a self-contained story and you don't need to know what happened last week or next week. And now it's almost all shows it's an ongoing story.
I guess I've been hearing, though, that we're in the golden age of TV since before COVID, like since about 2017-ish.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And now I'm hearing that we're in a boring point where nothing interesting's on.
Well, see, that's why I was saying yes and no, because I think there's so much out there. People are just kind of like, Yeah, like there's was an interesting study done on like if you give people three choices, like if it's like, all right, you're buying a new car and you can be green and blue and red, or and you can have a Honda, a Mitsubishi, or whatever, you give them three options and they choose one of those three options, they tend to be pretty happy. But if you give them 100 choices, they tend to be pretty dissatisfied with their choice, because when you have multiple options, people tend to think, there's probably something out there I could have gotten that was better. This one wasn't quite perfect, and there probably was something perfect. So I think there's so much out there and people can't keep up with it all. And also there's like, well, is there something else? Is there some better show I could be watching? So I think it's kind of flooding our senses, and there's just so much that people are kind of like over it. We're kind of spoiled,
What you're saying could very well be true, and I don't keep track well enough to be able to figure that out. But it just from an outsider's perspective, it seems like if we're mining Marvel so deep that we're taking basically failed comic books from the 80s and making them into shows now, and Star Wars is now on its like umpteenth iteration.
Yeah.
Like it just doesn't seem like they are like Stranger Things is actually a new universe, right? Like that's like a real creative, originality. I haven't seen it, but sounds like it is, right?
Yeah, it is.
Okay. So, all right. So you're not too worried about the status of pop culture.
No, I think there's lots of creative things going on, and because it's so broad, the internet allows like these little niches of people who are into Marvel or into Star Wars or into home improvement, or they can really thrive in these little micro niches that otherwise in the kind of TV world of the past wouldn't have been able to exist. But it can now, because they can start a YouTube channel, or they can, it can get a show on Disney Plus or in whatever NBC's streaming app is now. Or so.
Yeah, I have some annoying cousins who are in high school right now, and they like to tell me what their generation thinks.
Yeah.
And their generation thinks surprisingly similar things to whatever my generation, quote, supposedly thought, at their age, And I've often wondered, like, I wonder if their generation has a unity to it because of what you're saying. Because there's so many like niches within pop culture that you could be into Korean dramas.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Or you could be into some European, like, I don't know, I think Downton Abbey type stuff.
Yep.
It makes me wonder if the maybe we talked about this last time, the Quentin Tarantino world, where he was able to like make pop culture references that we all got because we all shared it from 4 TV channels, is just gone.
I don't think it's gone, but I think it's harder, and I think it's rarer. And so kind of within those niches, that's a little more self-referential. And one thing I do see happening is people, we fit into our echo chambers, and that happens politically, but it also happens with pop culture. You were talking about teenagers, if they're into the, Japanese anime, then that's what they're following on Instagram and TikTok and Snapchat or whatever they're on. And so that's a lot of where they find community. And even if there's only one other kid at their school that they go to that's into that, they can go online and find message boards and Discord servers and all sorts of things where it's just that. So they find this community. So I think a lot more, especially because of COVID, because kids didn't see each other in real life for 2 years, they feel more connected to these people that they see online. And I think there's something that's really missing in terms of the face-to-face communication. Even I would talk to my students when I was a high school teacher about, if I wanted to talk to a girl, I had to call her house and talk to her dad and say, "Hello, Mr. So-and-so. This is Mike Tenney. May I please speak to Ashley?" Like that, like they don't even call each other. They just want to text each other. It's like, sup, what are you doing? Hey, like they like even FaceTiming or so it's just their in-person social skills and finding community with people that are different. I think a lot of those skills they're having a harder time developing those. So, and even when they talk about, like, I would tell them stories about things that I would do with my friends in high school and crazy things we used to do. And they'd be like, "Man, this sounds so fun. We just like sit home and watch Netflix a lot of times." So I think there's this real disconnect. And if you look at rates of, depression and mental illness and just kids kind of feeling lost and adrift in the world,
Have you been following this Jonathan Haidt work about the introduction of social media and teenage girls?
I have. Mm-hmm. I would share that with my students. We would definitely talk about that and like setting good limits for yourself.
Maybe we should do an episode on that at some point. I wanted to talk, so I kind of want to bring this conversation to like theoretical pop culture, how Catholics consume it, what our right stance at it is. Are we to be anti-pop culture, choosy, create pop culture, what it is, right? I also was thinking the other day that like, you know how when you look at certain people and you wonder like, why is this person famous?
Yeah.
It could like the Kardashians or someone people.
That's Pete Davidson for me.
Okay, all right. I don't even know him. He's not famous enough for me. But there's a certain sense in which when people are famous, it's not just the art they create. Their very lives become like a public play.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes I feel like a conservative might be like, well, why aren't they modeling good behavior? And why aren't they living a great life to show us how to live, you know? But really, it seems like these like public lives of these famous people, it's kind of like a public morality play in the same way like a Greek tragedy would be. Like they do things wrong and you just kind of are watching. The price of their fame is we all are watching them melt down sometimes.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And you know, the Britney Spears thing has been playing out over the last year, and that's been kind of interesting to see how she's trying to get her life back, you know. But then also the Will Smith kind of slap at the Oscars was this interesting, very public morality moment.
Yeah.
You know, which I feel like I took that differently than anyone else. Like I loved that he slapped Chris Rock. Not because Chris Rock needed slapped, but I loved that, like, he's kind of been selling this, like, weird view of marriage that no one could really buy into, like an open marriage or something. And then this really weird thing happens where he kind of melts down and just kind of breaks in public, you know? And poor guy, but he kind of had it coming. And I don't know what to think about this. You know, it's like we get to, like, it seemed like at a moment he, like, was channeling a 1950s man.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
But the 1950s man would have like slapped and then taken his wife and walked out of the building.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And also not had an open marriage.
Yes, exactly. Wouldn't have been put in the same situation to need to do that, I guess. But yeah, I don't know. What do you talk about that stuff with your audience?
So, I mean, we tend to talk about like the art that the artists create and then only secondarily their lives as it relates to that. So like we did a Kanye West episode and we, you know, his, I mean, part of his, and you're right, like with these celebrities, part of their art kind of is the spectacle of their lives. Cause, you know, through social media, we have this window into their lives that we didn't otherwise, you know, and it used to be the paparazzi, you know, would take pictures of them and follow them everywhere. But then you'd have to buy the magazine. Whereas now it's just like all over Twitter. It's all over the internet. The paparazzi are still there even more so, but everybody's seeing it, not just the people that are interested.
And it's not accidental. It's not like we're violating their privacy. It's like they are crafting their lives as part of their image, as part of their brand.
So one of my, I think I might have talked about this on the last time I was on, but there's a Taylor Swift song called Mirror Ball. And basically the idea, what is a mirror ball? It's these little broken pieces of glass and they shine, you know, you shine a light on them and it reflects all these things. And the song basically is reflecting on fame and how there's this mirror ball. It's all these broken pieces. She's like, I'm a mirror ball and all these little broken pieces reflecting parts of myself up on stage, spinning in my highest heels, dancing for you. You know, I have these little broken parts of my life and I put them on display and try to make them pretty for you. And it's just a really interesting, I think that's a really cool metaphor for what fame does to celebrities and what we do by idolizing them and putting them on this stage is we get these glimpses into their lives. And I think you're right. It is in some ways a morality play, but it's also, we crave that authenticity. We want to see what makes these people tick. We want to, when we see their brokenness, it helps us feel seen in our own brokenness, you know?
Yeah, it's not clear that I mean, there's clearly really bad things that happen with that, but it's not clear that the whole idea of it is bad. Although I wouldn't want to put myself or my kids through it.
Yeah.
You know? So what do you think is the distinction between pop culture and just culture and then kind of following that? when does someone transition from being a pop culture icon to actually being culture? Like, will Taylor Swift someday be looked upon as an important piece of culture?
I mean, I think she already is, but just I think her style of songwriting is already influenced the next generation of songwriters coming up, Phoebe Bridgers and Olivia Rodrigo. And
can I stop you there? Like, I remember a long time ago, I met like an English major, and they were a grad student, and I was asking about dissertation topics, right? This would have been the 90s. And I said, does anyone write their dissertation on Stephen King? And the person laughed because it was like Stephen King is kind of like a pulp fiction writer. He's not worthy of an English department's, attention, right? And they were kind of saying he's not culturally important, or at least not important in the way English literature study is, right? But I'm absolutely certain now, 20 years later, there's quite a few PhDs getting written on Stephen King.
Yeah, well, and they said the same thing about Tolkien when he was writing about elves and dwarves. They thought it was silly and escapism, and he's considered like the literary juggernaut of the 20th century. So
there you go. Yeah, or like Aretha Franklin or the Beatles. The Chicago Symphony will be playing their music.
Mm-hmm. Even Shakespeare in his day, I'm sure, had his detractors, and part of that is just like whatever's popular. People love to hate whatever's popular.
Okay, good. I'm worried that some of my audience is a hater of the pop culture, so I'm kind of curious. So Aretha Franklin, Tolkien, Stephen King, for better or worse, love them, hate them, but they've crossed the bridge.
Yeah,
they are no longer in pop culture. They have actually, 100 years from now, they will still be at least somewhat relevant for the history of the 20th century and for the early 21st century. So who do you see now? Like you think Taylor Swift will be that too? She will cross, like you're saying she crossed that bridge. I'd say, I don't know. The Chicago Symphony's not playing a Taylor Swift montage yet.
That wouldn't surprise me.
Wouldn't surprise you. You got to sell tickets somehow, right? So who else do you see that's crossing the bridge?
So I think Beyonce, definitely, especially because some of her more socially forward songs that about like feminism and racism and that sort of thing. Kendrick Lamar, I think from the moment he hit, I mean, he has profanity and stuff about like gangs and violence and drugs and sex in his songs, but it's definitely with a critical eye, a little more what they call conscience rap, where it's a commentary rather than just like a celebration of, I got my gun and I got my girls and I got my money and I'm better than you, which is kind of a lot of popular hip hop, and every genre has that. Country has its beer and its pickup trucks and its girls and cut off jeans, so every genre has kind of its silly little tropes. But I think Kendrick Lamar from the get go was providing this kind of cutting social commentary, and so I think already he's there and he will be.
How do you define pop culture?
I mean, it's whatever people are talking about, whatever people are consuming, whatever is they're celebrating and is influencing the way that they talk and speak. And it's definitely constantly changing. I think even more so now. Cool is an ever shifting blob of goo that you can't quite get your hands on.
Right. And most people wouldn't call that culture yet, right? Like it has to somehow get beyond that.
Yeah.
Right. I don't know. Does it have a certain excellence to get beyond that, or?
So I think we're talking about a difference of degree rather than kind. I think it's just kind of, it hasn't seeped in really to where it's going to be here necessarily in 5-10 years, but I think it's still culture. It's just kind of a little more passing right now, and longevity doesn't make it more culture or less culture. It just means it's going to be around for longer, or it's going to have a longer lasting influence. So I think whatever's hot right now is pop culture and it is culture, but it might not still be culture 5 years from now, 10 years from now, a century from now.
So I was talking to a buddy of mine, and he's a theology guy, like professor actually. So, and he threw at me a line that took me by surprise because it seems so wrong. But maybe it's right, but he believed it absolutely. He said, culture is from cult, and cult is that which you worship, and that's where culture comes from. And I think like I kind of Googled that around on the internet, and because I was thinking like I know some pretty unreligious people who definitely have a cultural significance or a way about them that like a style, a little subculture or something. And so I Googled around, and it kind of looks like that is the etymology of the word.
Yeah.
Right. Do you think that that's a true? It seemed to me like to make that understanding true, you have to do some mental gymnastics.
Yeah, I think there may be a little bit of what they call the etymological fallacy there, where because you understand the root of a word, you understand what a word means, and that doesn't really take into account that like words change in meaning over time. So what it meant originally might not be what it means now. But I think there's something to that. In it, if you think of what people worship, and this goes back to Plato and then Augustine and then Aquinas, what they said that like the substitutes for God are that people put in their lives. It tends to be wealth, pleasure, honor. What did I say? So it's wealth, pleasure, honor, power, I think is the last one. So you're
kind of describing gangster rap, right?
No, I'm talking about Thomas Aquinas.
Okay,
but those things are often celebrated in gangster rap. So I think when we see the people that speak to us and we make popular, that speak broadly to our culture, and enough people pay attention to that, then they become famous and we see them everywhere. A lot of times it's those four things that are speaking to the broken parts of us that have spoken to people across time because it's part of our fallen human nature. So I think it's often those things, but our souls aren't just totally broken, right? That would be more like a Martin Luther, John Calvin understanding of the human person, is that we're totally depraved and totally broken. Whereas the Catholic view would be more that we're like bent. And there's these parts of our heart that are fallen and seek those things, but there's also these parts of our heart that are still good. At our core, we are still made in the image and likeness God, beloved child, his little sheep, his little baby. And there's parts of our soul that still seek the true, the good, and the beautiful. And so in these mirror ball icons of pop culture, we have this mix of truth, goodness, and beauty, but also wealth, pleasure, honor, and power. And we're attracted. There's parts of us that are attracted to all of it. And so what I see in my vocation in this Pop Culture Catechism show is helping people develop the mind of Christ, as St. Paul calls it, or you might call it just like the lenses through which we can see and we can sort the wheat from the chaff and say, all right, Kanye West, all right, Taylor Swift, all right, Beyonce, all right, Will Smith. Where can we separate here, and where can I learn from their mistakes, and where can I learn from the tragedy of it, and where can I celebrate? Where are they really tapping into something that is part of the human experience, and they really are grasping onto something true and good and beautiful and articulating in a way that helps me to celebrate it as well.
All right, so you're transitioning great to the last thing I wanted to talk about how we orient ourselves towards the pop culture or towards culture in general, And so like there's this trope, and the trope is true. Well, I mean, it's true meaning like people actually do believe this. They'll just kind of have this attitude of it's all bad. It's all, they're just against the culture, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Shakespeare is a hack.
Well, they love him. He's old enough. You have to get to a certain age and vintage, and then you're okay.
If they were around at the time of Shakespeare, maybe they'd think he was a hack.
Right. No, they would have. Yeah, there's no question. No. But there's also just something about this that, like, even if they're right, like, even if every single critique they have is correct, there's no solution in what they're doing. There's no affirmative proposal. There's no moving forward. There's no, in a sense, like the Hegelian idea of like thesis, antithesis, and then creating the synthesis, like taking whatever's valid in this and like modifying the old. There's almost like a complete just like reactionary to just let's go back to the old, right?
Yep.
And none of us really know the old, because if it's old enough, none of us really experienced it.
Yeah, that's true.
We just have we just know it by its reputation.
Yeah, and we can kind of have this idealization of the old.
Exactly. I think that's very common, right?
You guys talked a lot about that in your episodes on like the radical traditionalist movement.
Right.
It's kind of this idealization of this golden age of Catholicism that like never really existed, So.
Right. And I also think like your Shakespeare example is really on point. Like, do you really understand Shakespeare if you just think of him as high culture, or do you have to think of him as a little bit trashy? you know, like a little bit like he had men dressing as women, you know, doing bombastic things on stage to please the crowd. You know what I mean? And that's great too. You know, there's a value in that. All right. So there's these people who are against, and I think there's just a shortcoming in that. I don't sense that you have this attitude, right?
No.
So you just articulated, I think, your attitude pretty well, but I want to give you a chance to say more about it. I feel like you're saying that we believe the world is populated with people created in the image of God. These people can't help but do good things a lot of the time, you know, just because there's so much goodness in the world, right? And that we as like consumers of it will, I don't know, consumer's not the right word. We as people who are participating in it need to like celebrate the good, disregard the bad, be choosy. Am I articulating kind of like what you do in your podcast?
So if I can steal a little bit from Christopher West, who's also been on my show, we talked about you too. When he's talking about what John Paul II did with sexuality, is he said, you know, there was kind of this reaction against sexuality because, you know, sexuality is bad and dirty in a lot of people's minds. And so you take this picture of a beautiful naked person, you crumple it up and you throw it away. And that's like the rejection of sexuality. And then what Hugh Hefner, the founder of Playboy and the pornography industry, did is they took it out of the trash. They took out this crumpled thing and said, no, this is beautiful. Look at how awesome this is. But it's still crumpled up. It's this twisted, distorted version of the original beauty. And he said, what John Paul II did with the theology of the body is he uncrumpled it. And he says, this is the vision, right? It's not, this is a beautiful person with a body and a soul. It is not an object to be used. And sexuality is good. It's powerful. So it has, you know, strict limits, and we need to use it. We need to steward it and shepherd it well. And so that's kind of what I feel is my perspective is, you know, at the beginning of each of these celebrities, each of these artists is a human person, beloved child of God. And something about them is making people pay attention to them and is shaping the world that we live in and the culture that we live in. And so I want to, for myself and for anybody that, you know, listens to the show, help us, like I said, develop those lenses to be able to see the good and the bad, to be able to uncrumple that paper, you know? So, and I think there's a real holiness in that, to being able to redeem and not just reject.
So I don't have any problem with what you said. I'm going to push back on it. I have two real objections though that I want you to deal with. So one is, I feel like that's a very positive vision. I'm all for positive visions. I think we merely as a negative vision, we're certainly not with Christ. But I feel like there's a naivety in the vision that you just said, in that there can just be really damaging stuff. You know, like we're not telling people go look at pornography and
Absolutely.
pull out the real like beauty of the human body and disregard the lust, right?
Exactly. And not even to mention like the exploitation that is happening and you are supporting by watching it, you know, even disregarding that, then the effect that it has on you, because we do need to recognize that we do have this fallen nature. And so we do need to protect ourselves and set good boundaries. So like I don't watch Game of Thrones. You know, I love fantasy. I read high fantasy fiction all the time, and I watch the TV shows. But Game of Thrones, as many people has recommended it to me and said, you would love these books, you would love these shows, I just stay away from them, because what little I have seen or looked into, I just know it's for lack of a better word, too porny for me. And that would not be good for me. So I think there is a certain discernment and a certain prudence and a certain, you know, this is why I think it's good to be talking about these things in conversation with other Christians, is we can discern and say, hey, maybe you shouldn't be watching Bridgerton. Maybe you shouldn't be watching Game of Thrones. Maybe you shouldn't be reading that book or visiting that website or following this person. Because not just lust. I mean, when so many people just doom scroll on their social media, and it's soaking them with envy because, oh, I don't have the body or the clothes or the vacations or the seeming peace of mind that person has. And so it's not just about lust and violence, the things that normally come to our mind. There's pride and sloth, and like all of the seven deadly sins can be something that can be exacerbated by our use of pop culture and our consuming of pop culture. So I think there is we do need to set good boundaries. And I also think, I really respect when you say, I don't know what's going on in pop culture, like, I think a lot of people should be like that. Like, not everybody loves music the way I do. Not everybody cares that Beyonce has a new album out today or a new song out today. And like having a certain detachment from it. And that kind of inoculates you against some of the negative passing trends that come and go. But I think that's a matter of vocation. That's how you, in your call to a life of holiness, have discerned. And, for me, somebody who is a musician, somebody who was a literature major and just loves good stories and loves reading and talking about good stories, somebody who works with youth, it makes sense for my vocation and my call to holiness to be more engaged in that world so that I can talk about and evangelize with people. But I'm not doing what you do. I'm not going out and speaking with homeless people every day. But both are a missionary call, both are a call to holiness. And I think God has a vision there. And I think even what we were kind of poo-pooing before, the people who are just kind of like reject it all, forget about that stuff. I think that can be a vocation too. I think there can be some shortcomings of that, just like there can be some shortcomings with my point of view that I have to be careful about and not let myself fall into. I think there can be a vocation to just like, what? We're not going to have Netflix. We're not going to listen to pop music. We're just going to listen to Christian radio or anything. So I think it really is a matter of vocation and calling. So
you're answering both of my objections at once. I didn't even get to articulate the second one.
Sorry.
which is great. Which my second objection was just going to be like, doesn't it seem like there's some people who can't sort? Because like there's a little bit of what you're doing, and I'm going to put this really negatively, and I don't believe it this negatively, but I'm going to put it this way. It's like you're telling people to eat healthy at McDonald's. Like, here's how we're going to like pick through the menu, but there's like definitely people who should not be going through the door at McDonald's.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Because once you go through the door, even if you went in trying to get a salad and a chicken wrap, you're going to walk out with a McFlurry. Yeah. So
right. Yeah.
Even if I go to Netflix thinking, oh, I'm going to think of that, you're going to end up watching,
Right. And okay, so all right, I like what you're saying there. Do you feel so? What is your ministry? We still have a whole nother branch of like how to approach pop culture to get into. We need to talk about Larry Chapp's idea. But let me ask this: like, then what is your ministry? Like, is your ministry to Catholic kids who already have a deep love for pop culture, or just random Catholic kids, or non-Catholic kids that you're trying to like help them get to Catholicism? Or what? How do you describe what you're doing?
So lots of different people listen to my show and watch my show and reach out to me. Who I have in the back of my mind when I'm crafting my content, when I'm picking my topics, when I'm picking my guests, is former students of mine. And if you've spent any time in Catholic schools, you know that there are some people who come from awesome Catholic families, awesome Christian families. They're raised in the faith, and a Catholic school can really benefit them and really support the catechesis and the raising of the faith that's going on at home. But a lot of the kids are, and it depends on the school, but a lot of the kids are also just kind of like their parents didn't want them in public school, or the school had a good football team and stuff like that. And so there's a lot of kids where it really is just like first time evangelism. Maybe they celebrate Christmas and Easter. Maybe they go to church sometimes. And so basically like my old students who are now in college, young adults raising families out there in the world, starting their careers, who don't have religion class with Mr. Tenney anymore. Like that's who I have in my mind. And before I start every episode, when I'm talking with my guests, I'm like, just so you know, like this is who we're talking to. Maybe they're going to church. Maybe they haven't been to mass since their baccalaureate mass when they were at a Catholic school, or maybe they never even went to a Catholic school. So my goal is to speak to people who are kind of on the edge there. And so I try to minimize the Catholicese. If I make reference to JP2 offhand, I'm saying, oh, by the way, JP2, John Paul II was our Pope 2 popes ago, and so I which I'm not always good at, but that's who I am aimed at, is the person who is in the world and mostly of the world. And we're trying to help them take the next step to be in the world, but not of the world, and to give them a more of the Christian view so they can start to see the world with a sacramental imagination.
Yeah, so I see that as fairly evangelical.
Yeah,
meaning like when I talked to Larry Chapp, I said what he's doing is like pastoring, because he's like really talking to committed Catholics, and trying to keep them out of certain pitfalls, right? But you're kind of talking to people who might be showing up to Catholic school, but have not like had that moment where they've really committed, or they could be anywhere on that spectrum. You're just trying to help them get closer.
The people arguing about the finer points of the ordinary form versus the extraordinary form are not the people that I'm speaking to. I mean, they're welcome to enjoy my show and they can enjoy my show, but that's not who I am primarily trying to help. I feel like there's lots of content out there for people like that. So
yeah. And there are, I mean, to the extent I know people like that, some of them are like closet Trekkies.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Or go home and watch Game of Thrones and you're like, what?
Yeah. And I don't mean to disparage that. Like, that's like,
I know. I actually think that makes them more human. Okay. All right. Well, let's talk about this Larry Chapp idea, because I think the Larry Chapp idea frames an idea that I want to promote about how to be truly positive and not just negative, on the culture. So, Larry thinks that, by the way, this idea was said to me by a dude at a wedding like 9 months ago. And this guy at this wedding was like hungover, and he'd lived kind of it appeared like, I don't want to disparage him because I have a mad respect for this guy, but it seemed like he'd lived a rough life, right? Hadn't completely given up on the rough life either. And I asked him about something he thought, and he goes, I think really weird stuff. Like, he didn't want to tell me what he thinks. And I go, I think weird stuff too. And he goes, like what? And then I like told him some idea I had that was kind of countercultural. And he goes, yeah, not even close. And then I go, well, what are you thinking about? And he goes, it seems to me that everything in our society is just trying to ruin us and move us away from God. And he goes, and everything since like, and this guy was probably my age, like 45, right? And he goes, and a single guy, still, kind of long hair, whatever. Like, you still, I don't know how to just give you a correct mental image, but he's like, ever since the Rolling Stones, it's like they've just been kind of like trying to ruin us in some way. And he goes, and the only question I have left is it on purpose? Like, do they actually get together and plan this? And Larry Chapp's idea is not too different than this idea. Larry Chapp's idea is like, for a variety of reasons that may have been just financial and not evil, right? We have just taken God out of the sitcoms, out of people's life. Like religion, which is been such a big part of everyone's life for all of history.
Yeah.
We then start creating all this content where it just doesn't come up, and therefore we form a generation of people using pop culture where he called it the social imaginary. God is just not playing a big role, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So this is kind of a meta critique. So it's not that, this rapper cussed or this pop artist showed too much cleavage or something like this, right? It's not like some little incident of like misstep that you're sorting out. He's saying there's this underlying base layer that's limiting you, that maybe you're not seeing reality as gift. Maybe you're not seeing a thankfulness towards a creator or something like that, right? Mm-hmm. And that's forming everyone. What are your thoughts maybe on that idea? And then we can talk about what to do about it if it's true.
Yeah. So I remember listening to that episode and thinking that was a really keen insight that, they didn't want to offend anybody. So, they just stopped having the families on TV, go to church or really pray or anything like that. And I think, what that makes me think of is something that is kind of popular in Hollywood that's very important to Hollywood.
Can I pause you right there?
Yeah. Sorry.
I do think though that I wouldn't mind watching devout Jewish characters.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Or devout Muslims or whatever. Like, I'd be kind of interested, Yeah,
I don't know if you ever watched Lost, but one of the main characters there was a devout Muslim from Iraq.
Okay, great. Yeah. So, I do understand his point though, too. It was like a very innocent way we might have developed the problem. It was like, it's harder to tell a story with a religious person that everyone can relate to. Therefore, don't make them religious.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. So I think some people point to like the only TV family that ever went to church on screen was The Simpsons. They went to church like every Sunday. which is funny when you think about it. And they had whole episodes about religion, which I think was cool. I love The Simpsons, but I think you're right. Something that is an important value for Hollywood and the pop industry is the idea of representation. If you only have white characters, what a young black kids growing up think, when they never see themselves represented on screen. How does a young queer person feel when they never see LGBTQ characters on screen? They feel totally isolated. Like, I'm the only person that experiences these attractions. But one thing you never hear is, what about the religious person? What about the Catholic, the Jewish person, the Muslim, who never sees their faith or anybody of faith represented on TV? And so I would argue, as a believer, as a Catholic, that my religious identity is even more crucial to me, to who I really am, than my sexual orientation, than my ethnicity or race. So those beliefs are more important. And so I really think that is something that is missing. That's a blind spot that something I've heard you talk about a lot on this show is just the nihilism that so many people have, where they just see the world and they think, what does it all mean? What does it all mean? What does it all mean? And so I think I think we're already starting to see that some in pop culture, but I would love to see, like you said, devout Jewish character. The Daredevil show, he was Catholic, spent a lot of time in a Catholic church. So it is there here and there, but you're right. Generally, most shows don't talk about religion or religious ideas at all. Stranger Things season 4 does, actually, which is interesting.
All right, well, let's leave that and talk about, so like, if you're a Catholic and you want to increase the social imaginary, that'd be one way to think about it, right? Like, maybe you want to do good art. Maybe you also, like, I think part of what Tolkien does is, like, Tolkien and Lewis are very interesting. Like, I think of Lewis as primarily theological. Like, even in his Narnia stuff, like, he's like, this is Jesus,
Yeah, he's like, I want to make this theological point. How can I craft a story around this theological point? Whereas Tolkien is more like, let me tell a really compelling story that is, awesome in this big, beautiful world,
Right. Story first, but somehow Tolkien is still creating a social imaginary that is much more Catholic, even though he's not making theological points, right?
Yeah.
So I was trying to think of people who are significant, like, formers of culture that we would, like, endorse as, like, well, that's really great. Like, they really, like, helped the social imaginary or helped truth or help beauty or what, and the people I thought of in the 20th century kind of were Tolkien.
Well, I'll give you 3. So the first would be George Lucas, and I think Star Wars is.
I was going to say that. Yeah.
It's rife with spirituality and themes of faith and losing faith and doubt and good versus evil and temptation and redemption.
All right. So particularly the first 3 he made. Because the first 3 he made, it's the importance in the individual, it's the hero's journey, it's kind of like Hinduism on steroids as far as the religion goes,
Yeah, and we did a whole episode on that too. But also The Mandalorian, which is out right now. There's a whole thing about faith.
Okay, well, I haven't seen The Mandalorian.
Well, I did a whole episode with Bob Rice on The Mandalorian and faith and religious rigorism and stuff. So yeah,
this is great. Go watch Mike's Mandalorian episodes. Now I'm going to drag you back though for a sec.
Okay. So yeah, I got a few more examples if you want them. So
I do, but we have to talk about Star Wars for a moment.
Okay.
So I felt like there was something truly epic about Star Wars. In a similar way to Tolkien, it started a whole genre. It started a bunch of creativity. It got people's heads going in a certain direction, right? And then there was this need in the next releases, the three later movies.
Yep.
Not even talking about all the more modern Disney stuff, but to scientize the Force, right? Which sucked. Like, I don't think I'm alone in thinking that. Like, I don't even need anyone else to agree with me on that. Like, it took it from a spiritual. It had to, like, make it measurable. It had to give it an explanation, and the explanation kind of sucked. But it also just took a mystical dimension out of Star Wars.
So, which I think the later movies have put back in.
Right. Okay. Because they realized that was a mistake, maybe, or what?
If you watch Rogue One specifically.
I've seen that one. I don't remember it that well, but I did see it.
I'm one with the Force, and the Force is with me. And definitely the Clone Wars, later seasons with Ahsoka and some of the stuff she goes through. Definitely.
And they're not just.
So, but I think I don't mind that, because that is a debate in our religion too. Like, is prayer just helpful because, is it just like meditation? It helps you kind of center yourself. Is confession just good because it's psychologically beneficial, or is there something really spiritual happening there? So I think that debate happening within the Jedi is the same thing that happens within our religion.
Right. All right, well, go ahead and give me your other examples of.
All right, so the other one, and some people might get in trouble for this, but Harry Potter, which we also did an episode on. If you want to, like, there is no better pop culture example of soteriology. Soteriology is the fancy theological word for like the study of salvation and like how Christ saves us. And there's a few different like theories and models of like, all right, what does it mean when we say Jesus died on the cross for our sins? And one of the more famous ones is called the Christus Victor, the victory of Christ. Christ is the victor. And like Harry Potter in the throughout, but especially the 7th book, it's like textbook Christus Victor is, that he like faced all the violence and hatred and evil of the world and took it onto himself. And in his crucifixion, he crucified it. It didn't crucify him. And so he conquered death. So death didn't kill him. He killed death and conquered by this act of sacrificial love. And J.K. Rowling, she famously said, at the end of the books, she said, "I'm a Christian. I can tell everyone I'm a Christian now. I didn't want to tell anybody I was a Christian while I was writing the books because I thought they might figure out the end." I think Harry Potter is absolutely like one of the best examples of that sacramental imagination in a Christian. It's one of the most Christian works of literature, in the past 50 years, I think.
Do you have another example?
The other one, TV, it's for a little more recent, is Avatar: The Last Airbender, animated show, in kind of an anime style, but it was made in America, not by the Japanese, and it is tons of spirituality, themes of doubt and faith, tons of morality. I would teach a whole morality and ethics course just with Avatar: The Last Airbender, and you can talk about just war, you can talk about racism, you can talk like it is. Yeah, right. It is a brilliant, awesome show. We did an episode on that too.
So let's take all this very seriously. I'm okay agreeing with you on everything you said. Okay. The thing though is like everything we just mentioned was fantasy world building. Mm-hmm. Like it's not like you had the Beatles, or it's not like you also had a rock group in there. They were all the examples we had a certain ilk to them. You know what I mean?
I mean, I could give you some rock groups if you want.
Well, let's pause on that. Maybe I do need to hear those. And all of those, I agree, are like affirmative. Like they're kind of genius. They're moving the culture and the pop culture towards God if they're doing what we think they're doing. But then there's these other Christian projects where it's like Christians just want to make a movie that shows family values or the kind of Christian rock genre or something like this, right? And these things always feel like they failed.
Yeah.
Even when we say, like, I keep having people bring me Catholic rappers and they go, "You should use these for ministry. This will really be great." And I'm just thinking, like, I can't even tell good rap from bad rap, but I know this is not good enough and not going to work, But like, tell me in your mind, like, what's the distinction there? Like, how do we tell, like, these, like, let's say there's young artists listening right now, and they don't have to be young artists. Like, there could be stay-at-home moms who are going to write the great book, right?
Yeah.
They could be listening right now, right? What is this, like, creativity that truly is positive that's, like, what do we even call it? It's not really evangelization, Harry Potter's doing.
I think I can answer your question. It depends on the audience, because those, Pure Flix is the company that makes all those kind of like saccharine, almost like Hallmark Channel type movies for Christians. But there are some people that really speaks to, and it really encourages their faith and it really helps them. And that's okay. And, people always make fun of like, Christian radio or whatever, but it sounds cheesy on the radio, but you sing that at church with
Mike,
your neighbors.
Are you just blessing everything as having a good aspect? Can't we just agree that some of this stuff is bad?
Sure, we can agree that some of this stuff is
it's
bad.
Cringe. It's cringe. When we're going to lose people.
When something is popular, there's a reason it's popular, and there's something that is speaking to people, and there can be kind of this curmudgeonly part of it that's like, Chris Tomlin is crap, Hillsong is crap. But when you sing those songs, there's something beautiful that can really help people. And so I think, Flannery O'Connor is going to really speak to some people, and really, because she talks about like that brokenness and that she has that more Gothic style, and that really is going to help some people.
But like, how dare you mention her alongside Pure Flix? You're conflating things that are not the same.
That's what I mean. I don't know if you ever read these books. There was this guy, Bud McFarlane, that wrote like Catholic novels about like the Marian apparitions. It was like called Pierced by a Sword. And
I think I've seen the covers of them.
Yeah. So anyway, they were like super cheesy, but like there's like, I learned a lot about Marian devotion from those books, and they're not going to do for people what Flannery O'Connor does, but it does serve a purpose. And I think a lot of times what we say is like, oh, this is really great, and this is just kind of like, is like the darker stuff we think is like really great. And I think that's something that Tolkien was rebelling against, was saying like this fantasy stuff, the elves and the dwarves and the fairies, it's not any less valuable. And Lewis did the same thing with like Paradise Lost and the Narnia books, and like kind of rehabilitating that sense of the fantastical. And one of the great criticisms of them was that it was escapism. It was escaping from like the real world. And what Tolkien and Lewis were saying is, when you say real, you mean the things that we can see, we can empirically verify with our five senses. And when you just look at the world empirically with your five senses, you're right. Everything you see is dark and gritty and depressing and terrible. And why wouldn't you be a nihilist? Because it seems like there's no purpose to it. But if you have the sacramental imagination, and you and the elves and the dwarves and the fairies and Avatar and Harry Potter and Star Wars and the Force, when they teach you, they can help teach you to have, to go into the wardrobe, to experience these spiritual things. So when you step out of the wardrobe, then you can see better in this world, and you can see the magical things about this world. And you can look at a tree growing and see like, well, that's magic. That started as this little seed, and now it's this huge towering oak that's lived for 100 years and is shading my yard, and my kids are playing it. Like, that is magic just as much as Gandalf doing fireworks or Harry Potter saying Expecto Patronus. But that's the magic of this universe. And by seeing it in that universe, I can see it here.
All right, I'm going to rephrase my question, Mike. I don't feel like
did I go way off
here. Yeah,
right.
Not that you said anything terribly wrong, but I feel like we've dodged the question.
Okay, sorry.
All right. If you're a Christian artist, or just someone who's trying to produce something good, right? How do you get to the amazing quality stuff and kind of get on the right track? And I don't mean just talent-wise. I mean, some people aren't as talented as others. But I mean, how do you like get yourself working on decent projects like a Harry Potter or a Tolkien or whatever, and keep yourself away from merely like, there's something cringe, fake, something about just like, it's almost like they're a bad version of Lewis. Like, I feel like the critique of Lewis is so good that he gets away with making these theological points in the story.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I feel like Lewis's favorite author was George MacDonald. I love George MacDonald's old stories, right? And he's making, like, to me, they're just spiritual treatises, but they're really good stories too. So if you're really good, maybe you can, right? But a whole lot of people are just like taking these theological points and somehow creating really bad art.
Yeah. So I think one of the discussions, I'm in a book club with a couple other guys, and one of the things we talk about is how characters often are they like archetypes? Are they like unrealistic ideals to which we should try to inspire us? They're like an ideal, or are they real? Are they like somebody you would meet in real life? And I feel like we kind of need both in good stories. And if you just have the ideals, a lot of times it comes off as hackneyed. And even if there's a redemption story, if the redemption story is too easy, then that seems hackneyed. And so I think you need kind of a mix of these idealized characters like Aragorn, who is just like noble and noble and noble through to the core. But then you need some characters like Sam and Frodo, who are going to struggle, and you're going to see their inner struggle, throughout. So I think having a good mix of those is gonna capture people, and it gives you a sense of the mystical. It gives you a sense of the true good and the beautiful, but also it's not so far out of reach that it just seems hackneyed and bland. And again, a lot of it is kind of like what you said, it's the craft of the author. Do they just tell you, or do they show you? Just say show, don't tell when you're writing, and that goes for songwriting or movie editing or anything. So
that's good. Yeah, like when we write Simple House letters, we try to show a theological proof. Like if you have to like say the story of ministry that happened and then explain why it was important afterwards, you somehow mistold your story.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like these one-dimensional characters are the furniture of a story. Like these characters you don't develop, but if you don't have those multi-dimensional characters that really are important, you aren't really doing a good job at all. But anyway, all right. And your channel, I'm not trying to plug your channel. I'm just trying to get at what you're trying to get at. You are you're not just sorting into the J.K. Rowlings and into the Star Wars and into these important things, right? These maybe more Catholic worldviews. You're actually delving into the Kanye West, who I actually have a lot of respect for Kanye West. I made a post, the Kanye West for president or something, and my my family made me take it down. They said it was too irresponsible for me to say something like that. But I feel like we've had crazy men in there before. We can handle it, But anyway, well, what else do you have to say, Mike? Thank you so much for coming on. What do you need to plug anything that you're doing, or?
Yeah, just popculturecatechism.com if you are interested in seeing the show. We've or you can listen. I think most of my listeners listen, and then we have a few people that watch as well on YouTube and so forth. But yeah, we're wrapping up season 2 this summer. I'll start season 3 in the fall, and it's just it's exciting to see it grow. And I've had a couple people reach out to me recently and say, hey, my friends who are Buddhist have been listening to your show, and they're like talking about Jesus and stuff now, or even silly things like one of the teenagers I know that listens was like, oh, my friend was going to go see this, the new Spider-Man movie, but her parents didn't want her to go. But she said that there was a Pop Culture Catechism episode on it. So her parents said if she watched your show, then she could go see the movie.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, and another friend was saying like, oh, her little brother is an atheist now, and but he's been listening to your show and he's been asking more questions about the faith. So I've just been getting a lot of those stories recently, and so it's really encouraging to see some of the fruit 2 years in
I feel like that makes a lot of sense. Like to consume your show alongside the pop culture is kind of giving you that discussion that helps you, process it. So that's cool. Yeah. All right, well, God bless. I'm going to try to pay more attention to pop culture over the next 6 months, so that
that's what I'm for, Clark. You don't need to if you don't feel called to. So.
Well, I feel like all I participate in is like J.R.R. Tolkien from way back when. I know who he is. But anyway, God bless you, Mike.
Maybe I'll send you a book.
There you go. All right, thank you, Mike. I'll talk to you later.
God bless you.